afternoon, and welcome to the fourth meeting of the Civilian Police Review Board. We are anticipating at least 2 or 3 additional members to be here today, but I think we can move forward with some of the items. I'm going to wait to introduce Director Robert Clark, because I'd like for a couple more of our members to get here, because there are just a few things that I want to go through. So I've shared this with some of you. Keep going. But since our last meeting, we had another resignation from the Civilian Review Board. And actually, it was our newest member, Dr. Medina Cortez, and I will share her resignation email that will be delivered to the mayor. But essentially, I will tell you, if you recall, Dr. Cortez worked for the Attorney General, and she is an investigator, and she had not gotten clearance from them about becoming a volunteer for this work. And it was decided that at some point in the future, that might create a conflict, because BCI is in fact a part of the Attorney General's office. Yes. And so she needed to resign. The process, I'm going to stop for a moment until they figure this out. Okay. The mayor's office has started the process of interviewing from, in fact, had applied, the first time. And so I expect that at our December meeting, we will have our 11th board member. Something else that I would like to share with the board, and I may need to repeat this later on. Dr. Jones contacted me because an individual on LinkedIn had contacted her about the position of Inspector General. Introduced himself, said he had applied and wanted to be able to contact her to ask her questions or get perspectives. I would just say with members of the board that if you're contacted in any way, whether it's through Facebook or LinkedIn, from individuals who have applied, that you either not respond or just very quickly say to them that you cannot be in contact with them. Any concerns about that? Yes.
Just a procedural, just a procedural concern. Do we have a quorum?
We have 6, right? 1, 2, 3. No,
Oh,
and
okay.
there are 6 of us, it's only
there's
11,
6.
so we
There
have
we
quorum.
go. Gotcha.
Yes.
Oh, here comes Brooke.
And Brooke is on her way in, but we do
There we
have
go.
quorum.
Thank you.
So those are just kind of my introductory matters I wanted to take care of. We are thrilled today to have Public Safety Director Robert Clark join us. And so if we might just quickly go around the room and introduce ourselves, and then Director Clark will have an opportunity to share some thoughts with us. I'll start with Pastor Nathan.
Hi, Pastor Rich Nathan. I pastor Vineyard Columbus, which is on the northeast side of town. We've got 4 campuses around the city.
I thought I had to push the button, my bad. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Chanel Jones. I'm the Assistant Dean of Community Engagement, and I chair all of the public safety programs at Franklin University. It's good to see you again.
Good afternoon. I'm Brooke Burns. I'm Chief Counsel of the Juvenile Unit of the Ohio Public Defender. I work with kids all over the state of Ohio, in and outside of Ohio's juvenile and adult prison systems.
Of course, I'm Janet Jackson. I have the privilege of chairing the board. We had an opportunity to actually get to know each other a little bit before it became public that you were going to come. And I've seen you kind of out and about the community. But again, I would say welcome to Columbus.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Aaron Thomas, and I work in the College of Medicine at The Ohio State University, and I run a pathway program for historically excluded students who want to go into the health sciences.
Congrats, Director. I'm Willard McIntosh, retired Columbus police officer.
Hello and welcome. My name is Mary Younger, and I was with the Franklin County Public Defender's Office as a criminal defense attorney for 36 years.
The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, Madam Chairwoman, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak for a couple of minutes, and to all members of the board, thank you for serving. So let me certainly be one to share that with you, because we are in an era right now where all the layers of transparency and accountability that we can bring to bear upon our division of police, our division of fire, and all the public safety services is essential to rebuilding back transparency, trust, equity, communication, and ultimately dependability that our residents are looking for in the city of Columbus. And even beyond that, the opportunity that we have to model how transparency and accountability will happen here in Columbus, I think is a tremendous opportunity for us, and I look forward to being a part of the team. I'm in my 7th week, and I know that I've been counting days and weeks because it's been just that busy. I'm honored to be in this position and to serve with the women and men that I have an opportunity to serve with and work for. I recognize the responsibilities of the position of Director of Public Safety, but I also recognize the opportunities that we have collectively, not just from my desk or from myself professionally or personally, but the opportunities that we have. There's been a lot of things that have happened across the country, and I don't have to spend a lot of time explaining that to you. But a lot of those things have not really been different from what has happened if we go back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. They're just a repeat of a lot of things. One of the elements that I think that makes it different today is the immediacy of information sharing. When I first started in law enforcement back in '86, there was no such thing as the internet. There was no such thing as social media. And it took some time to share some things. You had to find, at that time, you had to find a quarter in your pocket and find a payphone that worked to be able to share information. That's not where we are today. We are certainly in an information and technology era where we can share information immediately, and not always for good. There's a lot of information that gets shared misappropriately, and it really influences things, not just in our neighborhoods and community and our city, but around the globe. If we just look back to everything that happened with George Floyd, we can see that the reverberation of that event and those series of events really impacted the globe. And there were individuals who didn't speak English, certainly didn't know Mr. Floyd, who were protesting in their cities about the way that law enforcement was engaging those particular residents. So I think here in Columbus, with the inception of a civilian review board, as well as new leadership in the Division of Police, and even new leadership in the Division of Fire, and certainly now new leadership in the Director of Public Safety, we have an opportunity to partner with new members who are going to be a part of our civilian review board and a part of our process to bringing and enhancing transparent deliverance of the services that we all swore to deliver in a much more equitable, transparent, and collaborative way. One of the things that I share consistently is that we are in an era of policing specifically that must be understood by the community, must be accepted by the community, and must be collaborated by the community in order for it to be effective. Our methodology now needs to really be about collaboration and not occupation. And certainly we have the ability, when and where it is appropriate, to deal with things and deal with threats effectively. My second day on the Attorney General's protection detail was 9/11. So I certainly understand the threats that are posed to this country, but more specifically, threats that exist in our communities. So our women and men in uniform every day, both in the Division of Police and the Division of Fire, are poised to do the job we hired them to do. And they deserve the leadership and the resources to be able to do that job to the very best of their ability to serve the community in which they are swearing to serve. And we will hold them accountable for that, but we will also equip them with what they need in order to do that job professionally. And Chief Bryan has said on many occasions, and I certainly support, that where our personnel make mistakes, do things wrong, break the law, that they will be held accountable just as much as we will represent those women and men who are doing the job we've asked them to do to the very best of their abilities, so that we can eventually begin a process, and we have begun a process, but really enhance the process of making sure that our residents understand that they can trust, collaborate with, and feel that they are receiving the services that are necessary, not just to protect and serve, but to serve and protect. And that's a very different methodology that is really before us right now, and figuring out how we can partner with agencies, both within the city government and outside of city government, our community-based organizations, our faith-based organizations, to really be able to partner to bring some of the solutions. And I say some of the solutions because ultimately it will be a collaborative effort across the board to be able to bring the resolution to a lot of problems that have been multi-generational and that have existed for a long time. And many of those problems are not even for the police to solve. They are for a wide variety of agencies to solve, including mental health, addiction, and a lot of other things like that. But here's what we understand. Law enforcement is really at the tip of inserting those resources into the community. That's why it's so critical, under the leadership of now Chief Bryant and Assistant Chief Potts, that we are creating those partnerships and creating those insertion points where we can partner with agencies, both in city government and within our communities and faith-based communities, to ultimately be able to deliver those services that I just spoke of. I'm honored to be on the team. I'll certainly be excited to work with you and figure out ultimately down the road how we collaborate together and really bring in the resolutions and the solutions that we want to see in our community, so that as we build back better in our communities, that we are ultimately building trust, equity, transparency, collaboration, and communication. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today, and we certainly look forward to working with you in the future. And again, I'll say, welcome to Columbus.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back to the state of Ohio.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So to share with members of the board, two of our members are excused today. Mark Fluharty is ill, and Kyle is being cautious, and I appreciate this. He evidently was exposed to someone who had COVID-19, and although he is testing negative, he still thought it best that he isolate. And if anyone gets a text or an email from Reverend Tatum, please let me know. I have not heard from him. The next order of business would be the approval of the minutes from the month of October. They have been shared with you. Is there a motion to accept?
So move.
Pastor Nathan, who is second? Thank you. Mr. McIntosh. Are there any questions about the minutes before we vote on them? If not, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Motion passes. So, you folks gave me quite a challenge in terms of committee assignments. And I've made some decisions without communicating with most of you. Two of the committees definitely will have at least 5 members. That, of course, would be training and education and community engagement. And I realized, even though Laura's not here to tell me this, but I think that means that I can't even sit in on your meetings as the board chair, because that would make it, I I'd be violating the public records. So, which is really a tough thing to accept, that I can't do that. For each committee, there's a minimum of 3, maximum of 5, and those are the only 2 committees for 5. I have intentionally left a couple maybe with only 2 names at this point, anticipating the addition of another board member. So let's first start with training and education. Dr. Jones will serve as chair. Kyle Strickland, Mark Fluharty, and Willard McIntosh will serve as members. So that does give me an opportunity to add a 5th person, and I plan on doing that. For rules and regulations, Brooke Burns will chair, Mark Fluharty will serve. For nominating committee, Reverend Charles Tatum will chair, Aaron Thomas will serve as a member, and I'm leaving, again, that 3rd position vacant at this point. Under standards of professionalism, I'm asking Pastor Nathan to chair, Kyle Strickland and Brooke Burns to serve. And the one that absolutely I think everyone wanted to serve on, community engagement. Mary Younger will chair, Aaron Thomas will serve, Willard McIntosh will serve, Reverend Charles Tatum, and Pastor Rich Nathan. I will say at this time, and I just don't know when in terms of the schedule, but that I would anticipate, especially with community engagement and maybe also training, that after 1 or 2 committee members, to figure out, purpose and things of that nature, that we would essentially have a committee of the whole at a board meeting, so that all the board members could hear the thinking, again, especially from community engagement. I think that's just the best way. We all have quite an interest in that, and I will talk with the chairs individually as we go forward. At this time, are there any questions?
Can you just repeat them real quick? Just the names. Not the members who are on, but the names of the committee.
The names of the committee?
The names of the committees, yeah.
Okay, so there's training and education. There's rules and regulations. The nominating committee. And so, for example, with nominating committee, that committee may only meet once or twice. And I'm anticipating that elections would be next April. That's the end of our first year of service. Standards of professionalism and community engagement. And I would say, as we continue to work together and learn together, if a member of the board believes that there should be another committee, please approach me, have a discussion, and I would bring it back to the board. But I thought in terms of just getting started, 5 committees, and we seem to cover what is absolutely required in our bylaws, and then others that we think are certainly appropriate. And again, if you want to individually reach out to me, please feel free to do that. I'm quite open to text communications. Now, at this time on the agenda, we were going to have a report coming from Pastor Nathan, Dr. Jones, and Kyle. And this was, it really isn't the Committee on Social Media, but rather on media inquiries. I did attend the meeting, I think it was November 1, of the committee. I can tell you that there was a lot of conversation. Some of it, spirited. Now, I know that they anticipated bringing a document to us today. And then when I saw some communication this morning, I'm just not sure that's going to happen. So would either one of you bring us up to date on where we are? And even if we don't have an actual physical document before us, if there's some things you want to share with us?
Yeah, sure. So the committee did meet on November the 1st, and we had some language presented by Pastor Rich, as well as some language presented by Vice Chair Brooke Burns. And the conversation centered on the board members, when they speak, not being a reflection upon the entire board, as though it might jeopardize, I guess, how the board is perceived in terms of being impartial in their decision-making and whatnot. And so we went back, and then we discussed that for quite some time. And then Brooke presented or emailed us basically some additional revised language. And we were in agreement to an extent with some of that language. However, there was some concern that it still didn't encompass basically what some other people thought we should be encompassing in that language. And so before we present anything to you, we basically need to go back and look at Brooks' revised document with some of the language that was presented by Pastor Rich, and come to a happy medium where we can provide that and share that with the board, and then let that facilitate a conversation on, in terms of which direction that we should go. The biggest concern is creating some parameters around when board members speak to the media or when they're called upon, ensuring that whatever is said is not a poor reflection upon the entire board, and also making sure that when board members do speak, they're speaking from an individual capacity rather than as a representative of the board. Does that make any sense to everybody? Pastor Rich, did you want to?
Yeah. No, thank you. That's really, really succinct. The one of the issues that arises is the perception of the board in the mind of the community. And so some of the language before had to do with the way that we were interacting with other city officials. And that's really important. But we have another constituency, and that's the public. And how did the public perceive what we're saying and doing? And so in our social media or in our communication with public media, statements that we make, the public often doesn't distinguish between I'm speaking in my individual capacity. As a member of the CRB, there's a reflection on the impartiality of the CRB. And so how do we protect people's First Amendment rights and also their professional, this isn't the only thing people are doing. We also have our own professional lives where folks are calling upon us to render opinions about things. How do we square that with our participation on the CRB so that there's a perception that when things come before us, we're objective, we're impartial, we're a quasi-judicial body. And that's what we're trying to do. I actually forwarded to you the real simple language. I just asked my assistant to forward it to you. So it's very brief, but along with what Brooke produced, I had a paragraph, and it was borrowed from the canons of judicial ethics. So
I believe that all members of the board have received what evidently Brooke wrote. I mean, I have it, and then what you did, and so I don't really know if there is a need to have any. Do you think it should be read at this time in its entirety, and that there be discussion? Let me share one other thing with you. As I was listening, when I joined the meeting on November 1st, I shared with members of the board I was going to try to just listen. Well, as I've said before, and I'm not taking his name in vain, the good Lord did not give me a poker face. And some of you have probably seen that here in this room, although I try very hard. But when you're on Zoom And Dr. Jones is looking at you, and you can tell, I'll say, okay, you were talking even though you weren't using words. But one of the things is I just sort of listened to the debate amongst them. I mean, even on this issue of, are we truly quasi-judicial? I thought that at some point in the future, and I think it was specifically Kyle said it might be great when the Inspector General comes on board, that we should in fact have a facilitator who could inform the board on how to respond to media inquiries and to be a part of this. And so Dr. Jones was able to identify a colleague from Franklin University. We've connected just via email. We haven't actually talked. We're probably, quite frankly, before we can get that training done, it's probably not going to be until maybe March. And I'll kind of tell you why in terms of where we have. Maybe we could put it in somewhere else. But I think that would be good for all of us, to actually have an outside person facilitate the conversation around how and what we should do. And at least at the next meeting, even if we don't discuss it, we can have in print, or even if we could maybe get it sent out to the board beforehand, if it's in, if you have it in such a form that it can be sent out, I think we should do that.
Definitely do that. It was almost ready, and then we just needed to just merge the documents, so we can definitely do
Okay,
that.
so we'll get that sent out, okay? Any questions from members of the board about this at this point? Okay, again, thank you for your work. Thank you. And so now on the agenda, I think we are back to our ABCs of policing. And I think I could check with Colleen. Colleen, at this point, have all members of the board both gone, or maybe it's Director Speaks, gone on their ride-alongs and finished their scenario training?
They have done the scenario training. I can't speak to the ride-along.
So, ride-alongs. Has everyone done their ride-alongs?
I've done one, and I'm doing a second tomorrow.
Okay. And I look this direction, ride-along? Okay.
Madam Chair, I believe that we are one person shy of doing the ride-along.
On ride-along, okay. Well, I didn't know, and this isn't on the agenda, and just depending on the time, because I don't know how long, and I don't want to rush the finishing of this, but, we rarely have an opportunity for just kind of open discussion, and so I didn't know if any members wanted to share their thoughts about, the ride-alongs or the scenario training. Actually, only one board member who was in my training is here, and that's Aaron. I found it quite interesting. I mean, I enjoyed, both parts of it. So just, if board members wanted just to share their thoughts, I think that Aaron has also indicated that he wants a second ride-along. I was in the 5th precinct on a Thursday, South London, and it was as quiet as a church mouse. I mean, there was like nothing.
Mine too, that's why I want to.
And so I was told by the officer, well, if you really want to see something more, you want to come on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, and you really want to come in the summer when it's hot. So, but I had great conversation with a third-generation police officer, and we came to the conclusion that maybe I really knew his father, because his father was head of narcotics when I was on the bench, and I think I signed more search warrants than any other judge during that time period. But it was quite informative, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So, gentlemen, do you want to come up? And someone's in control of your PowerPoint?
I think we're okay with the PowerPoint.
I mean, are you going to,
No, ma'am.
oh, we're not using the PowerPoint.
So.
Okay.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, most of the stuff that we had to cover was covered during our great, robust discussions last month and the scenarios. So as far as our actual presentation, I think we've wrapped it up. But at the same time, I got the sense that there were still lots of questions to be had. lots of answers that you're still looking for. So hopefully we can provide more of those answers. Madam Chair, we're excited to be back here. We are proud of the training that we provide to the Division of Police, and we look forward to talking to you all about it.
Questions? I was, and this is really more about our experiences, because I had served on the advisory commission, I kind of thought I was going to know what would happen in the scenario training, and it was completely different. It was completely different, which for me personally was a really great thing. The questions, Brooke, did you have your hand up? No. Questions?
I always have questions. So when we were at the scenario, one thing that I was looking forward to hearing from you all, we had some back and forth conversation about this, is the officer, or one of the officers said that, I forget what happened, what the scenario, exact scenario was, but it involved the baton, right? The rubber baton or the soft baton. And they said there are certain levels or certain tools that you could use for certain level incidences. And I was looking forward to a rundown of like what those levels are in correlation to the tools that you could use at your disposal. So do you understand what I'm asking? Yeah, can you talk about that?
So I'll speak kind of generally to it, and then perhaps Lieutenant Coleman can go into more details. So we have what's called a use of force continuum. And so essentially what that says is that for certain actions by a person, an officer should generally react in a certain way. So there's lots of caveats there. That's why I have to say generally. And it's not a step-by-step process, so you don't have to start at the first one and end at the last one. But we wouldn't expect, so let's take it drastically. We wouldn't expect that if an officer showed up to talk to someone that they would use their firearm. That would be wholly inappropriate. At the same time, the reverse would be inappropriate. If a person came to an officer and had their firearm and was shooting, we wouldn't expect or require that an officer start by saying, please stop. And so it kind of is fluid in the middle there. But it's a document that we use in training and that we teach officers about those different levels and how they can move up and down on that continuum based on what the other person is doing.
And just to go off of what the commander was saying, one of the most important things of that use of force continuum that we have in those 8 different levels is the fluidity of it. You do not have to start at 1 or 0 even, as what is our first, which is officer presence, sparking of the taser, taser laser light. You don't have to go from 0 to 1 to 2 to get to that level of the 4. Right? When you were there for the scenarios, that level 5 is what we call that impact weapon. That was that baton. It would be a baton. It would be grabbing a chair if I had to, and utilizing a chair or some type of environmental thing. It would be a hard impact weapon or object that was utilized to help control or redirect somebody's combative behavior or to help get somebody into custody. You could go from, in your scenario, you could go from a level 0 to 5 back to 2, which would be the use of a chemical irritant, over to a 3, which would be a taser that didn't prove to be effective. Then you would go to level 4. If that wasn't effective, you could then go back up to a level 1, which would be just soft, empty hand control of that individual, all in one scenario, as you just fluidly move through it from there. We do have a copy of it, or actually it's posted online and it's in the PowerPoint. If we did not provide you with a PowerPoint from it, we can go for it. But when to use it, right? When to utilize that level 5 or those different levels of control based off of the individual's actions or perceived things that you have. Subject factors could include closeness of a weapon, being on the ground, exhaustion or injury, whether it be for you or the individual that you're engaging with. It could be the type of scenario and the environment that you're in. Multiple subjects versus multiple officers is also one of the factors that's there. From a level 5, that level 5 use of force that would have been that hard control, we're going to look at initially, we want there to be some type of physical force being used upon the officer. That punching, striking, kicking of that officer would be the level 5, where we would start with a level 5, or we would say you would be able to utilize a level 5 from there. But then it's just a guide right from there. So you could go to level 5 if those indications were there based off of the posturing, the speech, verbal or physical danger cues that you would see from an individual as you saw walking up into the scenarios from there. It would go from there. Do you remember exactly what the premise of this scenario was? Was it George Jones at Taco Bell?
No, it was, no, I think it was, the two drunk guys were fighting, and
Okay,
then
very
me
good.
and Mark came in and
Very
started
good.
beating them with the baton.
Well, you started utilizing
Yeah,
a
we
trained technique
utilized
to
the
individually
baton.
control someone. So,
You asked for the baton.
Yes.
So when we first got started with our training, we essentially had the taser, the truly pretend gun, and then the blanks. The baton was over on the table. The scenario was explained to us, and it wouldn't have been the two
that was the last one.
inebriated.
Okay.
But you asked for the baton, so it was an earlier one. So I'm thinking that it had to have a gun. I'm recalling that there were two scenarios that involved guns, one that involved the knife, the cutting, and then the two drunk guys.
Oh, yeah, the one with the, I'm sorry, the one with that she's referring to is when we walked into the warehouse, and there was someone actively shooting in the warehouse. Yeah.
right? And I think everybody got a little bit of different scenarios. The 5 ones in common were, we call it George Jones. It's an individual that is at a Taco Bell. You were working earlier that day, and if this rings a bell to anybody, please say, yeah, I remember that one, right? And then you said, hey, you were the one that filed warrants on this person. You know that that's George Jones. And so when he walks into Taco Bell, you have to then effect an arrest. And then we had the 2 individuals that were fighting in the apartment. From there, where you would engage with one, and then the other one would provide you with some type of other reaction. We had the individual that was sitting in the bathroom that was physically harming themselves from there. There was another one where we had you put the vests on, and then showed the individual that was stabbing forward or came forward with a knife, but was a Sharpie to show like the points of the contact and how fast that all happened. And
In the mall.
the mall walker, yes, the mall walker, yes. Getting called about a man in the mall that's pointing the firearm at people as he's walking through the middle of the mall, correct? Yep, from there. So, I have to ask, you said Chair Jackson said you asked for the baton. After getting the training, what was it that made you want to have that?
Well, I'm glad you asked that.
Yeah.
Because I was going to ask you something
Absolutely.
after this. But to the point, when we were here previously, and you were doing the training with the fake gun, and we were against the wall, all of that, something that I thought about previously, or after I left, was how, so my father was in the military, and was gunman, all of that, but we weren't allowed to play with guns. We never had toy guns, all of that. So I've never been comfortable pointing at a gun at someone, right? And that stayed with me, and so I wasn't comfortable doing it then. But then also, I just naturally, what else is there to use except a gun, right? And so one of the things that I was really curious about is, when we were doing the demos, one of the officers asked me, he said, why do you keep aiming at the leg, right? And so anytime there was the taser, or anytime I was using the gun, I would aim at the leg. And because I said, my intent is not to kill someone, but to just kind of disarm them momentarily. And it just, we had a lot of back and forth conversation about that. And it just so happened like maybe the day after we did the training, I think there was an article in the New York Times about, I forget, I should have committed it to memory. But it was about a sheriff who was using the new training logic to shoot at the legs instead of, the upper torso, right? And so I was going to ask, do you foresee that being implemented into your training moving forward? Obviously, I only read this one article. I haven't read, general studies about it, but it seems to be kind of a polarizing ideology in law enforcement. Do you foresee a change in the way that you all are training to kind of encompass these new training theories and modes of training?
So, with that,
I will share with you
Yes,
that Sergeant Cheatham shared with you, and again, because I found all of our conversations fascinating, and we talked a lot, but he just said that there were documented cases of individuals who've been shot in the leg, but they don't stop coming at you. So you're not really stopping them for whatever reasons, they're still coming at you.
so with that particular type of training, it is, I do. And so the goal is a noble one. The fewer people that we kill, the better off we all are. It's absolutely a noble goal. There are some caveats to that particular training. For instance, and I don't know which article I read versus you read about the same thing, but they would not encourage officers to use that with a person with a gun. They might encourage officers to use that with a person with a baseball bat, perhaps. But like Chair Jackson said, you can be shot in the legs and still move. The legs are a smaller target. It would be amazing if all officers could shoot exactly what they intended to hit, but that is not reality. Particularly under stress, it's even more difficult to do it. And so when we ask officers to shoot at a smaller target, the chances are even more likely that they miss. All that to be said, that it is something that we will look at. I have not heard of a lot of people doing that, so I'm hesitant to say that it is yet the future of training, but it's an idea that has been around for a while, and this is the first sheriff that I know of who has put it into practice. It's also interesting that he has chosen not to put that into policy. So their policy still does not require officers to do that. So they have trained folks to do something that is not what their policy says. That is not typically how we would operate in Columbus. We develop a policy and we train officers to follow that policy. So it would have to be something more than just the training bureau decided that we were going to teach something different. We really would have to get buy-in from everyone that says this is the right thing to do. So while we're aware of it and look at it, I'm hesitant to tell you that that's coming tomorrow or soon.
Well, that's good to know that if, for instance, one of the charges of this board is to review policies, so if we were to find in our review of a policy something that we make suggestions for you to move forward, you would then have to, consider, study how that affect the policy and then implement it into training standards, right?
Yes, sir.
Especially having gone through the scenarios twice now, my question is an A and B. First, how frequently do cadets go through scenarios, or how many hours of all the training do they do those types of exercises? And then two, if you know, what is the general proportion of those scenarios where a level 5 hard control is what's required to kind of successfully, like if a sergeant were to see you do it, would say, that was good, I'm not going to pick apart kind of what you did. Like how many of those scenarios require that level of force to stop the person who's in the scenario?
So the state of Ohio requires 5, 10 scenarios throughout their training. A building search, traffic stops. They require one that uses the baton. We provide around 120 scenarios to officers in Columbus. The vast majority of those do not require the type of physical force that, a baton, a firearm, or something like that. That's probably around 10 that we would expect it ends with physical force like that. So most of them have, some level of human contact. So whether it's a traffic stop that you have to get the person out of the car, we would, want to see that you can properly control their body and things like that. But almost, very few of them, around 10, end in physical force like that.
And for each individual person, as they're going through, their use of force in terms of how they move about that continuum and what their choice is based on them as well, not only their perceptions, but their level of being comfortable or what they're perceiving at the time, and also the setup. I know we keep going back to that initial scenario that we did at the last meeting with the emphasis on just kind of like the reaction time, and showing that reaction or action beats reaction from there. But you get around utilizing or being in that situation by a good setup, like we talked about the last time. We weren't teaching that this is how you respond to a bank robbery. We were just using that to just show that action can beat reaction when you're there. The scenario with the baton, many times we have our recruits and cadets, while they're coming through the academy, one person could utilize a level 5 and it'd be acceptable based off of what they were faced with, but the same exact scenario, based off of how the individual approached, how they walked in, and what they want to go with their first level of being able to start, can change it from just being utilized a level 1, if anything, right? So that same scenario, that George Jones, where you end up utilizing that level 5 baton because you were struck, someone could just decide to utilize a level 1, and that would be sufficient to have it be the end. It just depends on their level of being able to actually employ that tactic.
If you have a cadet who, for lack of a better term, consistently exceeds the level of force that you all at the academy may deem appropriate, what sort of intervention and or redirection or continued training is done with that person?
Yeah, that's great. So after every scenario, with every recruit, we do a debrief. So these are the things that you did well, and these are the things that you did poorly. So for some of those scenarios, we're there, we talk about it in the moment, and you'll go on to another scenario. And then there are some of the ones specifically that are required by the state. If you're not using the appropriate force, if you're using too much, you would fail that scenario, and then if you are remediated, if you do it again, you continue to fail, that could lead to termination or removal from the academy.
We even implement and have one that's that we utilize on the day when they're doing some of their training with the individuals in the suits that do not require any potential force. And based off of how they go in and just pretty much escorting the person out, they're going through scenarios where force is a potential and used on several, and then they get to one, there's no force that's necessary at all. So if they were to utilize force on that scenario, they fail immediately because they're not perceiving that scenario for what it is and taking that individual incident and being able to work through it from there. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Then subsequent to the initial academy training, then how are officers trained subsequently to that?
So after they leave the academy?
After they leave the academy and do their street training, then is there a review, let's say a yearly or biannual, or whatever the term is, review? Because new procedures, new tactics are implemented eventually, and are officers retrained so that you can kind of keep an eye on individuals? Because people change, and then that way maybe individuals can be monitored more.
So specifically when it comes to physical skills, in most years, and I used to be able to say every year, COVID messed that up for all of us, so I'll go to saying most years. In most years, we have a day of training that is just involving those same physical skills. So whether it's baton usage as is required from our accrediting body, or it's more scenarios. And we adjust those scenarios continually. So we added scenarios about how to intervene if you see an officer using too much force, or we did one, I'm trying to think of the other one that we've added recently, but we do that constantly, where we are looking, you know, what is the thing that's happening right now, and we want to make sure that in addition to the classroom legal updates that we get and provide to officers, we want to make sure that we are providing them with retraining in those physical skills.
And how often, did you
So
say?
it's typically once a year, typically in the fall, and it's a full day of training.
And how many hours is that?
Well, it's an 8-hour day.
Okay.
They get an hour for lunch in there, but, yeah.
And each officer is given, they're given scenarios, and then they're reviewed with each officer individually? How does that work? Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. So
Okay.
if two officers went through together on a scenario, if it was a 2-officer run, then both officers would be reviewed together. But yes, they are reviewed immediately after their scenario, and they talk to them about what they did right, what they did wrong, how they could do it better.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
In addition to just that once-a-year training, to answer part of your question about that officer being reviewed or officers being continuously reviewed throughout their normal yearly work, right? Because just once a year, 8 hours a day, that's when we go out and we actually get to utilize the academy and the training to put them through scenarios. But throughout their regular tour of duty, they're reviewed and observed by their supervisor. So everything that happens out on the street, every use of force that they might have gets reviewed by their direct supervisor, and they have to provide comments and review that, and then that gets sent up. When you get to, we have an EARS process, which is an early warning process, to where if you hit so many categories in terms of uses of force, not taking any consideration of if they were bad or good or excessive or anything like that, you automatically get reviewed for an EARS review, to where all of your then uses of force are reviewed by the EARS committee. That officer, every single officer, then they also have a 90-day performance evaluation that they go through every year, which is 90 days prior to their anniversary date or their birthday. And they also have a yearly review that they go through that each supervisor conducts with them. During that, you look at, I think it's 15 different categories, and I might be wrong on the actual number, but part of that is utilizing their good judgment, the interpersonal skills, everything that you would want on an actual review. And if somebody is deficient, then you put them on a performance plan from there throughout the year. So we don't wait to just have something exposed in the 8-hour training that's once a year, maybe. Throughout the year, we also, it's the equivalent of continuing education credits. We get updates through our Power DMS system and through our advanced training unit and our training bureau of anything that would change, any new policies or any new techniques. And then we really, really try to hone those things in on that 8-hour once-a-year training at the academy for that practical application, now that we've done kind of the informative side of that. We're actually going through right now why 2 of the individuals that were here last time could not be here is because they're doing that exact thing with our current hiring group in terms of going over and changing up how we're doing some subject control things on the ground to allow for a little bit better control and a little bit better of working through with combative or resistive suspects when we actually go to the ground to stay away from some of the key areas. So, yep.
One final question. When complaints are filed by the public and they're deemed unfounded and they pile up, is anything ever done with those? Are they reviewed or anything?
Yeah, so like against a single officer?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So the EARS system that Lieutenant Coleman just mentioned Complaints is one of the things that they look at, and even if they're unfounded, that goes there, so that they have the ability to say, you know, yes, this officer had multiple complaints, and while each one might have been okay, in aggregate, we can see that perhaps there's a better technique this officer can be using, and we can retrain them, you know, without waiting for terrible things to happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, sir.
Kind of in line of going through all of the things that you review with them, I saw the recent news that the new chief will be incorporating chaplains going to the scenes to help with officers and bystanders or community folks or whatever. What other kind of mental health supports are in place that are offered in either training things or sort of the touching base that they've alluded to throughout this conversation? What other kind of mental health supports are available for your officers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have the peer assistance team. So the peer assistance team is made up of other officers, officers that have been specially trained, and they can be a sounding board, somebody that officers can come to if they feel like, you know, no one would understand but another police officer. Then they have someone that they can go to. The city has the Employee Assistance Program, so trained psychiatrists that the officers can go to. They are sometimes allowed to go there on duty. They can go there in their private time if they want and talk about all kinds of issues with them. The Chaplaincy Program that you mentioned, so the chief has a vision of chaplains that are available to represent the division outside, so to go to the public, to go to scenes of crimes and things like that and be able to help. But we also use the chaplains that we have now internally. So officers can seek them out and find time to sit down and talk with them and get some spiritual guidance.
Oh, go ahead, Lieutenant.
And that's one of the things that has grown, right? We have grown and expanded our peer assistance team. I'm a member of peer assistance, and we have a training coming up, an 8-hour training just for our peer assistance team members that is going to be on the 12th of next week. Fire has done it for years, and several years ago, we adopted some of the things that they were doing because of some of the tragedies that they were experiencing, and we brought it over to the police side with Lisa Callender and everyone at in our EAP office, and then expanded that even more. We cover things one-on-one conversations and interactions, to diffusing, to debriefings, which are more large scale when we have something like that happen. Something that affects a number of individuals, particularly in one incident. Something like a loss of life. Several Sundays ago, we had 9 shootings in the city during second shift from 1:30 until 11 o'clock at night. I was one of only 2 lieutenants working. 2 of those happened to be suicides. I will tell you right now, it was a very, very trying day for everyone, but I had to make notifications that day to 2 different families that they had their individuals that were no longer going to be with them. Unfortunately, one of those individuals, there were a number of officers that were out, and he committed suicide in front of the officers. So we immediately took action right then and there and activated a lot of the resources that we had available to ensure that we were not sending individuals back out to just go to the next run and not kind of make sure that they are mentally okay to be there for work or anything like that. A lot of times, and I use myself as an example because a lot of times it's easier to do that, but I just kept moving on, and I didn't realize it until somebody brought up to me that I also needed to take a break. And I was sent to kind of speak with individuals, but just to kind of take a step back. And it was one thing that, as a peer assistance team member, right, I'm supposed to be the one that identifies that. And our system worked because they identified it, just me being at work, and they took action right then and there, and it was a great thing. So we look forward to that expanding. We have our therapy dog unit, who actually, they love seeing the dogs. We just worked with the county to train up 14 more for other agencies, and these dogs go everywhere. But they are utilized at scenes. We'll get them into scenes and substations for officers that have been through some of the critical instances or just a unfortunate set of circumstances, and to help kind of give them just a little bit of a break and a relaxation of whatever they were dealing with. And then our chaplain program that is already in existence is expanding, so we look forward to that too. Yes.
Before your next question, and I'm not going to remember specifics, and I don't know if either of you two would remember, but in the Safety Advisory Commission's recommendations, there was at least one, if not two recommendations about the wellness, of officers. And so I would love to know if, and I think at some point we're going to have an update on all of those recommendations, but it was certainly something that members of the Safety Advisory Commission were quite concerned about. Specifically, for example, Lieutenant, when you said you're in one situation that's horrible, and then you immediately go to the next one, a realization that there needs to be a stop. So I will be personally interested to know what if those have gone forward. Yes.
Chair Jackson?
Yes.
I just wanted to mention that we have a police and fire wellness center that's under construction right now. And it should be open in March of '22. That's
Is
going
it a police and fire wellness center?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And it's going to have all of these resources there. It'll have a satellite EAP office, and it's off the beaten path so that our first responders don't have to walk into a city building to get the help they need.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
One unintended thing of all the wellness things for us as officers is we're a little bit more cognizant of things that we need to offer to the citizens when they are experiencing these tragedies that we are experiencing with them, right? We leave, and then, we deal with whatever the case is, but that family, that individual, those people deal with it as well. Just this week, we lost another youth, unfortunately, and the individual and the family and the officers that talked to the family the night before reached out the next morning, and they were more concerned with getting help and need over to the family than they were about our internal EAP, peer assistance. But they reached out to peer assistance, who then reached out and were able to get things over to the family. So we're seeing that kind of go both ways, or at least kind of morph in together, where we're looking at tragic instances to involve everyone, not just keep it sectioned between the family or the individuals that are there and then us as the workers that are there just managing the things there.
Yeah, so to summarize, I think what he said, it's kind of cool to see that the more that we have opened up and talked about wellness internally, it's allowed officers to recognize that there are city resources that they can get to other people. So the more we talk about it ourselves, the more we're okay with it ourselves, and the more we're willing to provide those resources elsewhere. It's a good thing for everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is helpful to hear about the personal toll that this takes on officers. And I did have a question. I assume there must be some kind of central database where statistics are kept regarding what kind of discipline an officer, what is meted out to an officer, for what sort of thing, without names, that are kept confidential. I don't know, is that data available to us? It is, one of the questions we were asking about before regarding use of force, where there's discipline. How many officers are there in the department right now?
Just under 1,900, sir.
So 1,900. It would be real helpful to just have some kind of picture of, okay, we have 1,900 officers. It would be very different if we heard, gosh, one officer 2 years ago experienced discipline. It would, that would the standard for discipline is way out of whack with the typical bell curve of every profession, where you've got great performers, you've got moderate performers, you've got bad performers. Or if we found, no, that's not the case, we have dozens of officers that are progressively disciplined in this way, is there data that we could access, or is that somehow kept confidential under the collective bargaining agreement? So no, you're not allowed, a civilian review board can't access that. Some of the questions that you're asking, I'd love to have just a broader picture of like, what does the Columbus Police Department really look like in terms of how we're reviewing and.
That's right. I think Director speaks.
There's two different reports. One, there's an annual use of force report, I believe that's published on the website. Secondly, Internal Affairs publishes an annual report also that will give all the allegations and the disposition of those allegations. So both of those.
Is the Internal Affairs report available to the public and to us? So it's all online? Yes, sir.
Maybe what we would want, it would be another meeting, because we really haven't done this. Some sort of, not oversight, but overview of the department that goes beyond what you're talking about, but an overview of CPD. And so I'll make a note, and then I think we can talk about it more, and other board members may say, I want to see this, whatever, and we can just have a session for a greater understanding of how CPD is currently working. Is that something you think you'd be interested in?
Also be helpful to understand the different levels at which you interact with each other at. So like you have precincts and, who's over that, and then who's over that, and who's over that. I think that a flow chart will be really helpful.
So, a lot of times we do that in the very infancy stages of some of our interactions with our Citizen Police Academy when we do this class, the ABCs, right? It's just breaking that down. It's very easy. If you all want, I could do a quick rundown from we work from patrol bureaus and expansion from there if you'd like. Perfect. All right.
Yeah.
So we have, like the commander said, and please jump in at any point in time if you could. Sure. We have, so you have the whole division of police. The vast majority of the individuals are assigned to patrol. There are technically 3 different shifts, but realistically, it's 4. We have our A, B, and C personnel, and then we have our 2 midwatches, our day midwatch and our evening midwatch. So of the city, there are 5 different zones, and in each zone, there are 4 different precincts that are assigned to each zone, all on 3rd shift. Every one of those zones and precincts has 1 zone lieutenant, and then every precinct has a precinct sergeant who's over their individuals that are assigned to them. Typically, it is anywhere, a sergeant will have, if it's A company, so 1st shift or 3rd shift, you will have 10 to 12 individuals assigned to your unit that you're over. 2nd shift will have anywhere from 12 to 17, depending upon where you work and who is assigned there for bike crews and things. And then you have 1 lieutenant that is over all of that. Then you have 1 commander that is like Commander Lang, who is over training in the bureau there. We have patrol commanders, so each 5 zone has a patrol commander. And then we split the city into north and south, patrol north, patrol south. Patrol north has 1 deputy chief, patrol south has deputy chief from there, as a quick look. And then we have our bureaus, and the bureaus are broken up kind of in the same idea and the way. Everything from support services to investigative to training. And everybody has your officers who implement, and we have our detectives that are in major crimes. Major crimes encompasses the robberies, the burglaries, our gun crimes unit. They have, each one of them has a sergeant that's over the officers there, a lieutenant that's over each side, a commander that's over the bureau, and then a deputy chief that's responsible for that administrative subdivision from there as well. And then it just goes up to our chiefs and everybody. So that's a quick snapshot of looking at exactly how everything's broken up in terms of the command structure and rank structure. Within that, there are a ton of different positions and jobs that are, and a flow chart is the easiest way to look at it as it's broken down. As you can see, it's a vast, kind of expansive network of different areas and bureaus, depending upon where you are. Yes.
I would add the division's annual report is a great resource for that. It kind of lays it all out. You know, this is who's in charge of what. The different units are all laid out in there, and a broad overview of what they all have done in the past year.
Time that the report came out, or maybe even when is the next one scheduled to come out?
2020's division annual report has been out for 2 months, I think, give or take. The use of firearms report is should be relatively soon finished, along with the use of force report. That one's still being written.
So I think for our next meeting, if we could at least each get a copy of the division's report that's been out a couple of months, and then as these other reports come out, we would also want them, just to peruse. And then we may still, as we go forward, want even additional information that we should discuss, okay? Or additional presentations. Just in terms of some numbers, how many, I'm specifically interested in deputy chiefs, commanders, and lieutenants. What are the numbers in each of those categories? And I know now that with the deputy chiefs, the chief also has the ability to have 3 assistants, although she only has 1 at this point. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, so currently we have 1 chief of police, 1 assistant chief, 6 deputy chiefs. There are 18 commanders, and I believe 52 lieutenants, Justin? Yeah, and 52 lieutenants. Right around 225-ish sergeants.
Other questions? Mary?
Is this structure pretty much the same structure across the United States?
So pretty much. A different organization might have corporals, or might have more assistant chiefs, you know, different numbers of all of them. But in general, you know, places are laid out similarly.
And why was this, do you know why this structure? It of course sounds like a military structure. And was it chosen for its efficiency? Or why was this particular structure chosen?
So I would
Probably.
hesitate to give you an answer.
I'm just curious as
The
to-
police department's over 200 years old, so
Yeah.
I can't tell you quite how it got to the way it is now. But one of the things that we're concerned about is a span of control. So the idea being that if one person has too many people that report to them, then they can't really monitor any one person. So if you reduce that span of control by putting more supervisors there. So if one sergeant has 10 officers that report to them total, but on any given day, they might have just 5 or 6 of them working that day, it gives them more time to make sure that they are monitoring each one of them. If you know, if we had one sergeant that had 30 officers or 40 officers, you really can't adequately supervise them when the number gets that large.
Okay, thanks.
And it has been adjusted over the years. We used to have the rank of a captain, which we do not have any longer for the division. I would not be able to quote exactly what year that change was made. It was well before my time, so, but yes.
I would go back historically to the 1800s in England. Sir Robert Peel is sort of deemed to be the modern policing, the founder of modern policing. He was out of the British military. He wanted to distinguish himself from the military, and therefore police the color blue to distinguish from the redcoats, if you will. So it came out of that paramilitary structure in England in the 1800s, and that's where policing sort of evolved from there. And by the way, I just looked at the website, on the division's website. The annual reports dating back over decades are on here. The casing reports, use of force reports on here, the internal affairs, all on the website.
Thank you.
Something you mentioned
implicit made me think about or ask, so the number of people who are being supervised actively, how does that relate to field training? So if during that period of time when new graduates are in their field training weeks, how many of them are being supervised by, like, what's the command structure there?
1-to-1, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, each new officer during their 15 weeks of field training is assigned to one single field training officer at a time. And so that person is responsible for evaluating them throughout their time. During that 15 weeks, they'll have 4 different field training officers so that we can make sure they are exposed to lots of parts of the city and lots of different people. We don't want, a personality conflict to keep somebody out of the job, and we also want to make sure that they see different parts of the city. So, but every single day, they have a single assigned field training officer for their time.
And on that note, I have a quick question. Well, actually, two. In terms of the field training, the supervisors, how are they selected for that? And then what type of training do they go through prior to, actually supervising a FTO?
So to become a field training officer, you have to have been a police officer in Columbus for at least 4 years. You have to have no sustained departmental charges. You have to be not under current investigation. And you have to be recommended by your chain of command. If all of those things are true, then there's a general knowledge test. So we ask them a bunch of questions about the directives and make sure we give them a presentation that they have to do to make sure that they can speak with people and teach. So if all of those things are the case, then they are selected to be a field training officer, and they do a 40-hour, so 1-week course. It's a lot about adult learning theory and paperwork, and this is how you monitor your officer, this is how you rate them. These are the categories that we want you to look for. And then in addition, they do some sort of in-service training every year. So I'm about to tell my boss that we want to do another 8-hour in-service this year. Sorry, sir, to surprise you with that. So we do some amount of that, every year to make sure that they continue to stay up to speed on how they do that.
Thank you.
And for the supervision side of that, they're directly supervised by their sergeant, who they're assigned to on those precincts. And they also have to do a review to make sure that they're meeting everything that they need to. And then the FTOs and the recruits have their own separate, in addition to chain of command at the academy. So while a recruit is out, they're being reviewed not only by the supervisor that is there from the patrol level, but they're also being supervised by the FTO office, which is Sergeant Barker, and I apologize for the additional, there's another FT Indigo, supers at the recruit training, but same chain from there, and ultimately everything comes back to Commander Lang as well. So that you have 2 kind of groups of oversight there.
Other questions? Well, if there are none, again, we thank you so very much for coming and sharing with us. This has been quite helpful to us. Something tells me that we're going to request additional information, about the division, and I know that you will absolutely be ready to provide it, but thank you.
I gotta ask, where are you gonna ride next?
I don't know. I tell you where I don't want to go. Same place. The same place at the same time. So, I would like to experience what else is happening in the city, because I live on the east side, so that's where I went. So if someone wants to take me, I will go gladly.
Come ride with me, we'll go all over the city. We won't limit ourselves to one area, all right?
I will do that.
I always tell people this, take advantage of our ride-along program, everybody that I talk to. Go where you live, and then go somewhere you have no idea about. That way you can see the similarities, differences, and just, you see that we are realistically 5 different areas of towns in one, so,
Yeah,
very
I
good.
will take you up on that. I do have one small question. In the flow of the things, where do the horseback riders fit in this city? I'm serious, because like you only see them at like concerts or something. But like, what is the need for a horse in Columbus?
So one of the cool things about a horse is that people want to come up and talk to them, right? So they have great uses outside of this, but community relations is a great tool that the horses are good at. Yeah.
They're loved in German Village when they come up to Lindy's
Yeah.
and receive, I think they're carrots, but you can, where I usually sit, I can see them right outside the window. And you're right, people are just flocking,
Yeah.
to them.
I was very fortunate to grow up, and I got exposed to horses early. I learned how to ride Western and English, and I get to have that conversation with them all the time, which is very rare. My experience being exposed to horses early gave me a goal moving forward, being younger, was I want to learn how to ride. The horses coming out in the communities and areas that exposure is not ever potentially going to happen other than the fair or somewhere like that. It is absolutely amazing to watch our younger generation of kids open up and start asking and questioning those things. And then you get to talk to people like, did anybody have Rufus Goodwin as the officer that was in any of the scenarios? Very tall, very slender, very athletic individual. Rufus is a full-blown cowboy. He rides around, he has a lasso, and he has a unbelievable talent. And seeing him be able to interact and go out and do those things is unbelievable. But the horses are exactly like the commander said, a great PR tool as well. And they're very useful for being able to be up and seeing over crowds, OSU, other marches, the races. They do a good job.
Being able to see above. So I know we've done ride-alongs, but would it be possible to do fly-alongs? Since I have everybody here that are the decision makers.
Yep, we could do that.
Wonderful, good, good to know. Sign me up.
It's a completely different experience, and it's great to see just their overall eye in the sky ability to utilize that. Setting up freeway closures and helping us locate stranded motorists is unbelievable when we have large-scale events happen. This past weekend, we had to shut down 270 because of a head-on crash, and they're instrumental right now helping with diverting resources to something like that. It's unbelievable.
Okay, well, we'll be in touch about that. Is there anybody besides Mr. Thomas that would like us to set up another ride-along? Mr. Young? Okay,
I will want one at some point, but not right now.
anytime.
Yeah.
Anytime, we can make it happen,
No.
but I'll make sure that we reach out to both of you to do another one right now.
Yeah, I want to go.
But you're gonna go with it? Oh, well, then,
Well,
No
I
problem.
don't know if he does this in his role as lieutenant, but I had the privilege of riding along with Sergeant Coleman, and I was able to witness, from my perspective, what I know about it, the best de-escalation tactics in the situation. Some of his officers were a little concerned about what he was doing, but it was interesting that when it was all over, I think everyone in the house except the baby was taken away for a variety of reasons. You just never know what you're going to see, but it was a very, very, very good experience. So again, thank you, and we may be seeing you again. Okay, thank you.
thank you, ma'am. You're welcome.
So we didn't have a break. It's 3:31, but this might be a day, so I want to just kind of get the feel of the board members. There's really, other than my sharing with you future meetings, topics, and I always like to do that at each meeting, I don't have anything else on today's agenda. But again, this is an opportunity that if board members wanted to raise topics, connected, to this work or share experiences, we could do it, but I really need to know what you want to do. Would you like to maybe take a break and reconvene, and then we'll just see what we're going to do? Would that work? Yes? Okay. So it's about 3:30. Let's convene at 3:45. Okay? We were on break. I was asked by a couple of people about the committees. But before I get to that, so we'll have a time just to talk about how they're going to operate. But I thought it would be helpful before we got to that point that I would once again share with you topics of our upcoming meetings. So our December meeting is Jeff Furby from the City Attorney's Office covering relevant constitutional and criminal law. We also are going to have Lieutenant David Justice, who's going to cover specifically de-escalation. And then I had an opportunity to have a conversation with HR Director Brandon and a member of her team to specifically talk about how we would approach the subjects of implicit bias, DEI, and cultural competency. So the recommendation was we'll do implicit bias first. It'll be a whole session. There's a self-assessment test that you will take. And then the second session, we can cover both DEI and cultural competency. So it'll be members of that team that will be in person with us to cover those two topics. And then at some point, I mentioned to you, we were going to have someone to specifically deal with the how you interact or respond to media inquiries. So the committees. And I'd have to turn to Dr. Jones and Brooke, because I think both of you chaired committees for the Safety Advisory Commission. So we didn't, as the commission, there were topics, and we pretty much had the members of the committee meet, identify kind of, the purpose, set their meetings. The chair would, in fact, set the meetings. So I think that initially for all five of the committees, we would want, after your initial meeting, just to share with us, very high level, what you discussed at that first meeting around what is your purpose, what are your plans, going forward. I would say that those meetings were rather informal. Again, it's one of the reasons that we are keeping them in terms of size under 6. So they're not actually meetings of, the board. For some of them, I think it's rules and regulations, and maybe, I'm not sure about standards of professionalism. There's actually some language, I think, in the bylaws for those, too. I realize that we're coming up on rather a busy season in terms of going into the holidays. Well, let me ask this. With the time frame of all the committees meeting at least once before the January meeting, would that work? You'd meet at least once, and I'm sure you're going to be meeting via Zoom. But by our January meeting, so you would also have the ability to have a brief report out, ask any questions, or just share. Any questions about that? Are you comfortable with that? Good. Thank you. Now, was there anything else that you wanted to discuss this afternoon? Then, is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second? Second. All in favor, raise your hands. We are adjourned.